Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Caleb's exhibition. Improving the Woodshop and Sculpture Studio. I think it was titled Improving the Places I have spent so much time in. He's going to tell you what he's going to do, but I just briefly want to introduce the outside evaluator. So it gives me a lot of pleasure to welcome back Michael Chevalier to Putney. And some of you might know Michael. He is sort of one of the perfect people to do an outside evaluation because he's sort of a Putney person, I think, at heart, and a real Renaissance person. He currently is a registered nurse, and he works at Brattleboro Memorial Hospital, but he is also, a minor league baseball player, a jiu-jitsu master, a personal trainer, athletic trainer here for a long time. What else? Probably the reason that he's here today is because for the last 30 years he's been a cabinet maker, carpenter, and woodworker. He studied originally at the Center for Furniture Craftsmanship in Maine, but I learned so much about woodworking and also about life in general from him. So it gives me great pleasure to welcome him back to Putney, where he served here in various capacities for 17 years, right? Yeah. Without further ado, please welcome Caleb to the stage.
I'm shorter than Nathan, so this mic is actually in a great place. All right. Hello. To anyone who doesn't know me, my name is Caleb Kirshenbaum. To anyone who does, I either warned you not to come or told you that you had to come. No matter who you are and whether I threatened you to be here, welcome, and I appreciate you coming. So, a bit of background. I've always loved making things. When I was a lot younger, I loved Legos and things that needed to be assembled. I would often take things apart and try to put them back together. Classic autism behaviors, if you will. I love problem solving and creative solutions, as well as puzzles and strategy games. I also have a habit of getting really into things to the point where I will lose track of time for hours on end. Keep this in mind for later. So, when I was around 10, I got started in woodworking after seeing it on YouTube. Looked fun. I didn't have many tools and had to make do, which was always fun for me because it allowed for really creative, albeit somewhat hazardous solutions. I mostly made small things with mechanisms, but over time I started to be able to build useful things. Woodworking was one of the first things I truly enjoyed and cared about, and has been massively beneficial in helping me manage my anxiety disorder, giving me a creative outlet, things like that. Coming to Putney was a big turning point for me in my woodworking career. Large part of why I chose to go to Putney is because it provided me with opportunities that other schools couldn't, like the woodshop, metal studio, and music programs. From pretty much my first day here, I've been spending at least a few hours a week in the woodshop. I learned how to weld the winter trimester of my first year. I've been in the woodworking evening 2 nights a week for the 3 years I've been here. I've done the carpentry afternoon probably 5 times, and taken both the sculpture 1 and 2 academic classes. I've also been the woodshop assistant twice as my work job, though my 5 trimesters of AM horse barn, including this entire year as the job boss, generally took my priority for work jobs. My first project week was trying to build a guitar, which I didn't fully finish but learned a lot from. You can see it in these photos. With help from people like Tim, Bryce, Nathan, and Brian Corrier, I've been able to improve my work massively, and I now build tables instead of cutting boards. The next 2 slides will have some photos of my current work. With all this in mind, why did I want to do this as my exhibition? The shop is mostly well-equipped, with a few exceptions, but what it's really missing is someone who can actually spend the time to just overhaul parts of it. We needed a good woodworking bench, a new storage area, tool modifications, other stuff, but there was never someone with the time to be able to do that. As for the sculpture studio, Brian approached me about designing an entire woodworking area to be built up over the next couple of years. I spend immense amounts of time in the shop, so it just kind of made sense for me to be the one to do it. I came up with a very long list of everything I wanted to do, which was probably about 2/3 in the wood shop and 1/3 in the sculpture studio. Nathan took one look at it, told me it was impossible while making fun of me, and helped me cut it down to something that's only a little bit unreasonable. I then got it approved by Bryce and Brian, since it is their spaces, and gave me some feedback surrounding what to prioritize. As a result, the exhibition, while still overambitious, was within reason, and the final products were able to be high quality and thoughtful instead of rushed. So, here's the list of everything I did. I was initially going to do a bit later where I showed it with everything crossed off, told people to clap, and then revealed that it was just a list of things I did instead of what I planned to do, but I cut that for time. Anyway, the first thing I did was make the first workbench for the wood shop. So I started by coming up with a list of features and requirements that I wanted to be in the bench. I wanted a certain size to fit the spot it was supposed to go. I wanted to have holes in the top to allow for certain types of tooling to be used. I wanted either 2 or 3 vices, and I wanted a storage rack instead of drawers for the base. Most importantly, it had to be stable. A good woodworking bench can't rock back and forth or shift every time force is applied. If it's not stable, it's effectively useless. I started with this workbench because it's been something we've needed for my entire time here, and I was never able to make it. I went over the design with Bryce before building it, who brought up some considerations that hadn't occurred to me. I made some adjustments to the design, which actually made it easier to build as well, and then I got started. Remember what I said about how I get really into things and spend insane amounts of time on them? This is a good place to point out that I was about 2 weeks in at the point when I finished the bench, and I was spending around 7 hours in the shop on some days. There have been project weeks when I've spent nearly 60 hours in the wood shop, which is actually about how long you should spend on a project week in total. The problem is that it was not for a double project. I have a bad habit of massively overworking myself, especially when I'm given free rein of my time, and I can safely say that not only have I learned nothing in that regard from this exhibition, I have gotten worse. Here are some photos of one of the 2 vices I got to fix up. I love fixing old things, especially if they're like mechanical or tools of any form, so this was really fun. It wasn't fun when I pinched my finger in that weird gear mechanism there because I wanted to see how it worked, and I didn't realize that if you turn it in the wrong way, it... Moving on. I also put some nice plywood faces on the vise, which will protect the metal from scratching the wood and give it a better hold. Whenever I don't have enough pictures for something in this slide, I will be using a pet photo. Right, so when he first saw the bottom of the workbench, Bryce, he takes one look at it and goes, "What are you, trying to park a truck on it?" Turns out I had massively over-engineered the base's storage rack. Right there, those are pieces of maple, like the top of the workbench, and I use them to fill in the space so that things could be put in. But the pieces, you can't really tell from this photo, but they're actually quite thick. And it was really unnecessary and more of a waste of these good pieces of maple than anything else. I learned a bunch about the actual strength and material properties of woods like maple, cherry, oak. The top was made of hard maple, which is often used for workbenches. I learned that the reason for using hard maple isn't actually what I thought. I assumed it was used because despite the name, it's not actually all that hard. It's pretty hard, but not so hard it's going to chip out or be difficult to make things out of, which is partially true. But the reason actually falls more in line with durability and stability than with anything else. Because of maple's tight grain patterns, which you can see here, you can see how close the rings and the medullary rays are. Maybe. It doesn't chip out or splinter as easily as something like oak, where the grain is kind of spaced apart. I'd never looked at material properties in this level of detail before, and it was a really valuable experience. I also learned a lot about repetitive processes, which I've done a lot of before and have been able to streamline. But due to the time frame, and especially in this case, the weight and size of these pieces of maple, this was a massive workbench. And maple is a pretty dense wood, and considering how thick it is, it was not easy to move around. Oh God, where am I? Right. This was the first time I really had trouble with things like the milling process. Milling is getting the wood to a usable state from its rough cut form. And again, it was challenging because the wood was so heavy and unwieldy, and I am not the strongest person. I did have one big problem with making this, and that was the base. I made some mistakes when gluing it together. I didn't have the clamps and all of that set up correctly, so by the time I got everything together, the glue had started to set up. There was a point I distinctly remember when I got very frustrated and said, "Fuck it, good enough." which was not the standard that I try to work to. That was during the afternoon at some point. And I went back that night. I do 4 evenings all in the wood shop. So I go back that night, and I just took the whole thing apart to fix the mistake. It wasn't difficult to break apart and redo, which confirmed that it just wasn't good enough in the first place. This was the only time during the exhibition that I looked at something and was like, good enough. And while I don't really like that I got to a point when I gave up, I'm happy to say that not only did I fix it, but I did not make this same mistake again. Every time I glued something up for the rest of this trimester, I had the clamps laid out. I had done a dry assembly without glue to make sure everything fit together perfectly, so that when you have the 15 to 20 minutes of working time, depending on the humidity and temperature, with the glue, you're ready for it. Can anyone spot the problem with it? This is a photo before I ungood enoughed it. Felix? Wrong. Noah? No, they are. Okay, never mind. You see this gap here? I thought someone would spot it immediately. That shouldn't be there. That is not just a gap. That's a piece that's not properly attached. You can only see the one there, but it's actually, there were several. I think on this side, it came apart really easily. So I thought it would be difficult to break apart because wood glue is in a certain direction stronger than the wood itself, and it came right apart. So the first iteration, simply put, it wasn't good enough. But when I finally got it attached like this, it wasn't only attached by wood glue, which is more than enough to make sure it never comes apart, but several massive screws called timber locks that are going to also keep it from moving on top of the glue, ensuring that it will not come apart. So the second bench. Every time Brian Corrier saw the first bench, look at it and say something along the lines of, I want that for Wender. And sometimes, I want that for Wender, but without this mistake. So I made him one. This time I was able to use everything I learned from the first to improve the process of the second. I milled the wood faster. My process for drilling the hole pattern was faster and actually much more accurate. I assembled I assembled the base much, much better, and the bench has a special feature, drawers. This was the biggest design difference between the two. The size and dimensions are a little bit different just to fit the space better, but functionally they are identical, except for the drawers. I've never made or installed drawers before this. It is difficult. I had to make 2 sets of drawers for the exhibition. The first was for a workbench I made last year out of hemlock. Those were just simple boxes made out of 3/4-inch plywood. The second set was a lot harder. Bryce suggested making them interlocked for more strength, but this led to some problems. Namely, that's a little more advanced and kind of difficult to do. You need to measure the box dimensions differently and make a lot of extra cuts that have to line up perfectly. I made a small mistake when I assembled it slightly wrong, but that didn't actually end up being an issue. Here's a quick photo of the drawer slides. These have to be installed very precisely. If they are unlevel, if one side is a little bit lower than another, it won't line up, it'll jam, you may totally destroy the slide, actually. Don't ask how I know. And so installing them was pretty difficult. I mean, getting the bench to Wender was hard enough. The top weighs at least 200 pounds. But I had to do the install there, which meant I didn't actually have access to all of the normal tools. You can also see I got to do a bit of experimentation on the top. These inlays, I needed less than half of them to keep this crack in the middle from spreading further. This was really just a space I found where I could test out a new technique that I hadn't done before. They came out pretty well. There's some gaps around the edges of them, as tends to happen for people who are new to inlays, but it was a good experience. And I think I could tell from like where I started to the last ones I did, there's a big difference in quality. I'm sure Bryce had fun watching this. I had to measure the height of the sides very carefully and make sure I installed the slides evenly at the correct height, since there's almost no wiggle room for them to line up. You have maybe a 32nd of an inch of wiggle room. Otherwise, it's going to jam up, maybe destroy the slide, and send ball bearings flying everywhere, hypothetically. And there was also another problem, which is that I used this material called shiplap for the sides. It's just rough cut pine. I chose it because it's lightweight, thin, and readily available, but it also has this really nice rough appearance and coloring to it, which I thought complemented the rest of the bench well. The coloration is similar, but a little bit different from the maple top. However, I just thought the rough appearance fit really well. And it does, it looks great. Problem is that it is a rough material, so it is not perfectly flat. So I had to take this hand plane here and flatten it in spots to make the drawers fit. I figured this would happen, and I was totally willing to take the risk, but it's another example of these material properties that have to be considered. Some materials are flat, like the maple that I milled for the top. Some need to be flattened, like the maple before I milled it, and some just aren't meant to be flat, like shiplap. Wood, like any living thing, it moves. Temperature, humidity, and more are all these factors that affect how much wood is going to shift seasonally. Every species of wood will move differently and move different amounts, which you also have to take into account. The problem was fixed by having the foresight to bring my hand plane to Wender, but if I hadn't known about that problem, which there have been times in the past when I haven't known that I would have to adjust something's size because it was not actually flat, it would have cost me time. I would have had to go back to the wood shop and get the hand plane and do all this and swear profusely. So the process of installing these 3 drawers took a little over an hour, but I learned a lot from it, and I'm glad I went slowly instead of trying to rush it. This bench is the main thing that the new woodworking area I designed in Wender needs, and I'm proud of how it came out. It's heavy, sturdy, and it can handle basically any project you could throw at it. I did a lot of smaller projects too. The one I'll show is just this miniature wood storage shelf for offcuts, because I felt like this one shows the goals of my exhibition the best. Found a problem, designed a solution, got some feedback on the design, built it, learned some things in the process. There was this little alcove beneath the stairs right there, which seemed like a good place to store small pieces of wood that were a little too nice to put in the burn pile. It's actually anchored directly into the concrete, you can see here. And in order to do that, it takes a special drill bit, a special drill called a hammer drill, which isn't nearly as fun as it sounds, and these special screws that can go into concrete without just snapping. I'd never used any of these 3 things before, but it actually really wasn't a big difference. One real learning experience from this, though, was that when you're using a nail gun, use the right length of nail. This is my favorite photo I took during this exhibition. It wasn't a big deal, and it took me like 2 minutes to fix, but it was just really funny because of this lack of foresight. And it's a great lesson on checking what length of nail you're using in a nail gun. I took the lessons from this quick project, it took like a day and a half at most, and applied them to a much bigger task, the wood storage rack. Our wood storage rack was abysmal. It had this whole list of problems, which you're now going to sit and listen to. The height of the layers was bad, they were spaced weirdly, it was too big, so moving pieces into the adjacent plywood rack was difficult. And because it was so wide, the side storage, which you're supposed to be able to use to put things against, was bad. So what was the solution? Rip it out and rebuild it. With the help of the carpentry afternoon, we moved all of the wood off of it before I got to demolish it. From left to right, we have partially demolished. I'd taken off some of the bottom ones, then took a picture. Fully destroyed here. I did step on a nail at some point and was like, hey, why is my boot heavy? And it's because I had picked up a piece of wood with my shoe. This is actually the 3rd time that's happened in this exact room. Anyway, and all the way over here, the tractor bucket completely full of all the dust and debris down there. So the new one has better height of the racks. You can see these ones are spaced too close. There was one down here, but reciprocating saw. And it's also a bit thinner, you'll notice in some later photos, to allow for better side storage and access. So the left photo here is the side beams. These are kind of the foundation for it. On the right, we have Bryce looking at my questionable layout. I needed help from Bryce for things like the drawers and a lot of that. And I consulted with him, Nathan, or Brian pretty regularly. This was the thing that I needed the most help with. I can safely say that I wouldn't have been able to do this without his help. One thing I can say I did all by myself was double check that I used the right length of nail, because all of this was attached using one of two nail guns. On the left, we have the first 2 rows installed. I forget if this was when I installed them incorrectly or when I fixed it. On the right, we have it fully installed. You can see Bryce double checking to make sure I did it right after I messed up 10 times in this process. It's worth noting, this was a really physical process. I had to climb around in this tight space. There were spiders on the ceiling. I'm deathly afraid of spiders. I had to alternate between several precariously balanced tools. You can see the level there. Wait, yeah, that's the level. There's 2 nail guns just kind of wherever. And one of them is really heavy. And as I said before, I'm not very strong. So this was exhausting. I also had to do this on a very short time frame. I was going to say that despite all the work, the final result is excellent, but yesterday I found out that I actually messed something minor up. But once that's fixed, it will be excellent, and it's going to last forever. Right, so originally, my project week was going to be making gifts for teachers. However, I kind of just got started early as part of my exhibition, and now I'm basically done with it. So for people who helped me out in the wood shop, I made marking knives. I ordered the wrong number of blades, so one person will be getting one just once the last blade arrives. I'm sorry, Brian. Fun fact, the people in these photos were given these marking knives on the condition that I get a photo of them looking happy holding them in a picture. So it's a 2-in-1 deal. It is a gift. You can see they're very nice, and it's a hostage situation. So finally, we have the miscellaneous stuff I did. Tool modifications, helping people with projects, which is a great way to mask my insecurities, organizing stuff, hiding from my crippling loneliness, maintaining and sharpening tools. All of these were very important aspects of my exhibition. However, it's just not entirely relevant to get into here. So I have some special thanks. First, Nathan for sponsoring the exhibition and showing up to at least half of our meetings. His advice and guidance on planning and direction has been invaluable. I know I make fun of him a lot for showing up to some of the meetings or not showing up to some of the meetings or forgetting some of the meetings or being late to some of the meetings, but he really was very helpful. He looks unhappy. I'm sorry, Nathan. Brian Corrier for being one of the best providers of feedback and constructive criticism that I know and for helping me with this presentation. The original iteration was truly terrible. And having been to nearly every exhibition up to this point, I can safely say it would have been the worst one. Thank you to Tim for putting up with me for at least 2 nights a week for the entire 3 years I've been here. Thank you to Bryce for helping me with everything, teaching me how to build and install the drawers, putting up with all of my bullshit, walking me through the very complicated framing of the wood storage rack, even though I kept doing it wrong. I have a minor processing thing related to short-term memory and multi-step instructions, and he's just been incredibly patient with that. Next up, I'd like to thank 2 Michaels, Michael Chevalier, my wonderful outside evaluator, and Michael Sardinas, who trusted me with this nice computer when my computer charger decided to explode on Friday, instead of giving me one of the Chromebooks so that I could finish my exhibition. On the student side, Felix Griffin's exhibition is also woodshop related, so we got to work together a lot. He's always willing to lend a hand to help me move things, as well as sharing the limited space and equipment when we're both working on large projects that have a lot of the same steps. Sharing a workspace involves making a lot of compromises on who uses what tools when, who gets what space, and things like that. Getting to work with people who understand that is just one of the greatest quality of life improvements that you can have in a shop. In a similar vein, Adina, Calum, and Kate were great about this whenever we overlapped, as was the entire design build class that was in the shop during one of my exhibition blocks. There have been project weeks when people really haven't been good about this, and it's such a noticeable difference. So thank you. So what are my final takeaways from this exhibition? I learned a lot of technical stuff about layouts, material properties, specific operations with some tools, streamlining other processes that I've done many times before, like the milling process on the second workbench taking less than half the time of the first, making drawers and all that. I've learned a lot about the process of designing and redesigning things to meet specific requirements and criteria. I have immense difficulty with diagrams and drawings, and for this entire trimester I've been told repeatedly that I need to start drawing things. So I'm going to keep working on that. I did make a 2D CAD model of the new woodworking area in Wender for Brian, but outside of that, it was only a few sketches of things. This is a big area in which I need to improve. The hell? There's a thing there. So aside from those things, my real takeaway is that I can now leave the shop knowing that it is substantially better than when I came here. I've likely spent near 1,000 hours in the wood shop in Wender over 3 years, a few hundred of which were in this exhibition. And I think that when I graduate, I won't be sad that I can't use the spaces anymore, but proud that I've actually been able to give back to the school's programs that I've gotten so much out of. To cap it off, I want to go back to what I said about how I'm almost done with what was going to be my project week. Instead of doing that, I am going to be redoing the very first project week I did, which was trying to build a guitar. There were pictures of it early in this, I think. I didn't have the skills or knowledge to pull it off in the way that I wanted to then, but I hope I do now, even though I'm still not entirely sure. And I promise, maybe, that if you come to my Project Week presentation, you will see a performance of a piece that I wrote on a fully functioning guitar that I built, finally finishing my very first Project Week in a shop that now barely resembles what it was back then. Thank you. Questions, comments, concerns, personal insults? Kiara.
There's a couple pictures where the wood is like a little bit wiggly. Is there a reason for that?
I think I know what you're talking about. You're likely talking about, it's called chatoyancy or flame. It's especially, let's see, yeah, right here.
No, like this side of the wood is wiggly.
Oh, that's lens distortion most likely. Like this is perfectly straight in real life and you can see a slight curve on it here.
Okay.
That's a photo angle thing. It's square. This one actually has some really bad distortion on it. It looks fully tapered. Yeah, Quincy?
What's the circle pattern on the workbench?
That you can actually fit tools in there that have the same diameter as the circle. I think it's either 3/4 of an inch or 7/8 of an inch. I think 7/8. The main tools that go in there are used for holding pieces securely to the workbench, things like that. So having this whole pattern, it's not actually going to impede things. I know it seems like my first thought is always having holes in a workbench seems really inconvenient. They don't get in the way at all because they're all the way through, so the sawdust can just drop right through. It's not going to get caught in there. And it allows you to use special tooling. I can't. There's light, whoever you are, I can't see. Oh, hey, Steven.
Hey, if someone was like watching your exhibition and was like, I've never been in the wood shop, but I think it'd be really cool to go now. Do you have any like tips for anyone who maybe doesn't have as much experience as you in the wood shop and is kind of inspired to get into woodworking because of this?
Do it. My like genuine answer is kind of just do it. Start with things. When I was, I think around 10, I just started messing around with things. We had like an old drill and an old hand saw. And I kind of tried to hack things together. Eventually, I slowly started collecting more tools. I got into more complicated things that had mechanisms, eventually like boxes, some small cutting boards, things like that. And I think one of the benefits of the modern technology age is that you can go on YouTube and learn a lot of things. If you don't want to take a class on it, just look up how to build a box or something like that, and you will find 1,000 videos telling you things that are someone's years of knowledge distilled into 10, 20, 4 hours, I don't know. Yeah. Aiden?
What's your favorite kind of wood to work with?
Can I give 3 answers? Okay. Walnut for dark woods, I think it looks wonderful. Curly maple for light woods. It's a little harder to finish without a lot of oil-based finishes will give a yellowish tint to the wood, so you have to use a water-based one, but it just looks incredible. And I think for exotic hardwoods, which often have like vibrant colors and things like that, wenge, because a lot of light-colored woods lose their color over time and turn into a brown. Wenge is very dark. It looks almost black when you have an oil-based finish on it. And it has a really distinct grain pattern. Like, you can recognize it immediately, well, if you know what it looks like. And it just has such a nice color that will contrast with almost anything. Finley.
I noticed when I looked at the second bench that was on display, forgive me if I wasn't supposed to touch it. The top is like smooth, but I noticed like the drawers weren't smooth. Did you not like finish them?
I did not sand the drawers because that's generally not necessary. I didn't want to lose any thickness. They're made of Baltic birch plywood. That's high, like furniture grade plywood. It doesn't need to be sanded or finished. Plywood moves. Earlier in this, I mentioned that wood moves over time. Because of the way plywood is constructed, it's a composite material. Well, all wood is composite technically, but it's a composite material, basically. It's designed to be very dimensionally stable. It's not going to move over time, or it will a tiny bit, but it basically cancels out. So as a result, you build things with wiggle room built in. Not everything is actually going to be glued together so that it has room to expand and contract across different dimensions. And so with plywood, there's no actual need to put finish on it because it's not going to move much anyways. Also, I would love it if you touched the bench. I would love it if every single person in here went up to that workbench and tried to shake it. It is currently held on by 2 out of the 6 screws that will be holding it on. And it's going to wiggle because the floor isn't level or the base isn't level. We're going to go with the floor, but it's probably the base. So it's going to rock, but you can tell, even though it is rocking a bit, that the thing itself, even only held on by 2 screws, is incredibly sturdy, which, as I said, is the #1 thing you want in a workbench. Anne-Marie.
Questions. The first is, I mean, it's a gorgeous bench. It really is fabulous. And you've used so many different types of wood. When thinking about the fact that wood's going to move over time, what were some of the considerations that you made when putting 2 different types of wood right next to each other? That's my first question. The second question is, how did you get this several hundred-pound bench in Courier, and how do you intend to get it back?
To answer the first part of your second question painfully, and to answer the second part of your second question painfully. To answer your first question, the considerations were primarily the shiplap on the sides, because the grain is oriented differently than these here. It's it's running this way instead of this way. It's going to expand differently. Wood expands across the grain. So they're screwed on. They can move. There's no glue holding the shiplap sides on. This will allow for the different thermal expansion, seasonal expansion and contraction, because those screws are more than enough to hold it on. As for the top is not glued on. It's held in place by screws. Currently 2, it will be 4. And this allows it to shift a little bit. There's room, like the drawers, even though they are made of plywood, so they're not going to move much, to allow them to still move that tiny bit. The bottom of the drawer isn't glued in, it's nailed in. And there's a bit, and the slot is slightly larger than the actual drawer base. So as it shifts over time, it's not going to rip itself apart, it's just going to wiggle a little bit. EJ?
What is the skill that you learned in this project that you're going to take forward in future months, do you think?
Oh, dear God. I need to start drawing things. Well, good for you. I didn't register that you said Project Week. I I need to start drawing things, but I think some of the efficiency stuff I learned is going to be saving me the most time. I was shown a new way to mill wood, that like rough lumber quickly, that it's not going to work for every situation, but the huge beams that this is made, this is I think 5 or 6 beams, that's it, for like a 20 something, like upper 20 inch wide top. So I was able to mill those way faster than the other one. For large beams like that, which again are incredibly difficult to move for me, that's going to be a massive time saver, as well as the processes I learned. Like drilling this whole pattern on the second one, I brought it over to a drill press. I had to use a whole table to do this because the thing is so heavy. Like you can't just hold it. But that is going to drill them perfectly square, and once they're laid out, like it's really not going to be very difficult. And the first time I used a spade drill bit, the second time I used a Forstner drill bit. If I never know how to pronounce the Forstner, Nathan. He says close enough. So however you use it, just a different type of drill bit, less tear out. Things like that. My main takeaways are going to be the little things. I learned time savers here and there, ways to do something just 5% better. Because at this point in my woodworking career, I can do the basics. But I'm 18. I don't know, I haven't been to trade school. I don't know all of these, like, the professional tips. And people like Bryce, Nathan, Tim, Brian Corrier have imparted enough of these little things and the little tricks that hopefully I'll be able to use going forward. Also making drawers. Gavi? Oh. Sorry, Gavi.